your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Hello, I'm Naveen Day. Thanks for joining us for a look at what made headlines this past week. Lethbridge police have charged a 39-year-old male after two senior citizens were assaulted in separate incidents that occurred within half an hour of each other. The first incident occurred around 3 o'clock Tuesday afternoon. Police responded to multiple 911 calls reporting a physical altercation along the 700 block of 1st Avenue South. Witnesses reported that a young man struck an older male in the head. The subject fled the scene prior to police arrival. EMS transported the 76-year-old victim to Chinook Regional Hospital, where he was treated for a serious head injury. About half an hour later, a 69-year-old man was walking along a path in Indian Battle Park when another man approached him. The victim offered a friendly greeting, but the passerby became irate and began yelling and struck the man on the head. The attacker took off and the victim returned to his home. Thanks to video surveillance, police were able to track down the suspect and arrested him on Wednesday. 39-year-old Curtis Lauren Babb of Colehurst is charged with 1 count each of aggravated assault. When we think about knowing how to manage our money, we usually think of it as an adult task, overlooking how important it is to learn the skill from a young age and, of course, teaching it to our children. Your Kids' Own Money is the book written by Juanita Enns, which addresses precisely this matter, the main pillars for living a money-smart life.
In the first pillar, we start the children taking their money and organizing it and getting it growing right away. That's the first pillar. So you're taking advantage of time. And then the other pillars are teaching them more and really start learning how to become experts around those areas. And then that will increase their income. So that's a great way to get kids focused. You know, a great age is even 4 or 5, like where they're able to touch money, like understand, to take see the visual picture of what the pile looks like, how big it is. It's so empowering. The book teaches not just how to organize money, it also teaches them how to produce before they can start consuming.
According to Stats Canada, household debt is one of the Canadian economy's largest financial vulnerabilities. Household debt levels have reached historic highs, in part because it has become easier and more attractive to incur debt. The time for high school graduations is quickly approaching. Now, while we experience moments of joy as we see young men and young women complete one cycle of life and begin another, there are some, however, who worry about not having dresses or suits for that special occasion. This is where an organization called the Cinderella Project comes in. Recognizing the importance of graduation in a young person's life, this group provides dresses, suits, and more. BCN's Heidi Echeverria has the story.
Welcome to the space. You're Sophia? Yes. Awesome. Welcome to the Cinderella Project.
From April to the end of May, the Cinderella Project welcomes boys and girls who are about to graduate from high school. Thanks to Cinderella Project, not having enough money won't stop them from making their graduation ceremony extra special.
The whole energy, the staff's energy is very welcoming and it makes me feel comfortable, and I was very happy.
The Cinderella Project was a program that was created to meet a need of students who were graduating in our city but were either unable to or choosing not to attend their grade 12 graduation because of not being able to afford a suit or a dress for their grad.
Community participation, which donates dresses, suits, ties, shoes, and jewelry in excellent condition, is key to making this possible and free of charge.
So they'll come in for a private appointment and our team will meet them and get them all set up to get them choosing, a suit or a dress. We also, when we can, we set them up with resources like a hair appointment or a photography session as well.
Very great opportunity, especially for girls that are graduating, and it's just a blessing and it's amazing. I'm very thankful for this. Most of my friends have bought their dresses for $800 to $500. I'm thankful I got mine for free. I think I tried like 8 or 7. There were so many beautiful dresses and it was very hard to pick. I got a pair of heels, silver heels, and a bracelet. It's just an amazing organization.
After 9 years, the Cinderella Project has grown to the point of reaching hundreds of students. Today, it has a team of personal shoppers were part of the 40 volunteers who run the appointments and meet the students. For Bridge City News, I'm Heidi Echavarria.
What a great story. After the break, news and commentary from across the country and Alberta, including updates from the federal election campaign trail and commentary from our popular contributors. Don't go away. On the campaign trail, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was in Halifax Thursday, speaking at a car dealership where he announced that he will end Canada's electric vehicle sales mandate if his party wins the federal election on Monday.
No $20,000 tax on gas-powered cars, no permanent bans in the cars you love and rely on. Let me be clear, I have nothing against electric cars. If you want one, buy one. Free choice. Make your own decision. I encourage you to buy one that's made in Canada. And I go even further to say that a Conservative government would bring real change and axe the federal sales tax on any vehicles made in Canada, so that you can save by buying Canadian. And that will allow us to bring back production and paychecks to Canada while making automobiles more affordable. And there's your choice.
The federal government has mandated 20% of all new vehicles sold must be electric by 2026, rising to 100% by 2035. And on the same day, during a stop in Coquitlam, BC, Liberal leader Mark Carney also addressed auto industry challenges, among other issues.
A few weeks ago, before the U.S. auto tariffs were put in place, we created a $2 billion strategic response fund that will fortify the entire Canadian auto supply chain, from raw materials to finished vehicles. We're investing in the future of the auto industry by building an all-in Canada network for auto parts manufacturing. And we're developing new markets with reliable partners. We are preparing to build our critical minerals industry. We're developing our leadership in clean energy and clean tech.
Now, reporters also challenged Carney, asking him about reports that U.S. President Donald Trump once again brought up the idea of Canada becoming the 51st state when the two spoke in late March. Carney didn't deny it.
The president brings this up all the time. He brought it up yesterday, he's brought it up before. There's a difference between the conversation that was held between leaders of government, which was this conversation, and a discussion that led directly to an agreement that as sovereign countries we would have negotiations about our partnership following the election on Monday. That's what the President and I agreed. That's what both of us reported back. And that's what I'm ready to do.
Carney is now coming under fire over this from other party leaders for not being forthcoming about what happened on that March 28th call. Carney originally said Trump had treated him cordially and showed respect for Canada's sovereignty. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says if he wasn't upfront about that, Carney may also not be frank with Canadians about the country's position in trade negotiations with the U.S. either. Singh was in Winnipeg Thursday saying his party will ensure Canadian values and rights will be kept off the table when new trade talks begin with the United States, including healthcare, environmental regulations, labor, and treaty rights. Singh also attacked some of the Liberal spending cuts.
We talked about Mark Carney and his platform and the fact that he has confirmed and committed to $28 billion in cuts, which would be devastating to healthcare, devastating to the services that you need. Just recently, he said, in fact, he was going to exceed that amount, that he was going to exceed those cost cuts. In fact, he said he's going to cut even more, that he was going to cut even more than $28 billion. He was confident that he was going to exceed that. That is going to be devastating. $28 billion was already devastating. He said that he's going to exceed that amount. That means even more cuts to the things that you need. We cannot afford that. We can't let him have all the power. You need New Democrats to fight back and stop those cuts, and that's exactly what we would do in the next budget.
The NDP, Liberals and Conservatives recently released their costed platforms. Now, to talk about this in more detail is political reporter Brian Lilley, who sat down with BCN's Jeanette Rocher. Take a look.
So, Brian, what stood out most for you about Poilievre's platform, which was released Tuesday morning?
Let me start off by saying that I'm not a fan of fully costed platforms. These are documents that they became very trendy during the Chrétien years with, oh, look, I've got a plan, and Jean Chrétien waving around the red book, but I've never seen a government that actually follows through on them. But they give you an idea, I guess, of where the government wants to go. What I would say about Pierre Poilievre's platform release is that it's reasonable. It's responsible. I would call it holistic. It looks at economic growth. It looks at ways to find savings that are not going to gut public services that people rely upon. He adds in things that some people would be shocked at, such as a lot of supports for families dealing with children with special needs, things like that. But overall, tries to look forward with economic growth, tries to say, look, here are the problems we've been dealing with in terms of a housing affordability crisis, in terms of slow economic growth, and here is how we are going to fix them. Lots of spending on defense, savings in terms of cutting the the tens of billions of dollars a year that we spend on consultants, and giving Canadians a tax cut so that we get to keep more of our own money. They're promising over several years a 15% tax cut on income tax. They're going to cut the GST on building new homes, things like that. And also, they're promising tax cuts if you invest in Canada. That's something Pierre Poilievre has been out with before. So not a lot of new things in the platform release, but bringing together everything that he's been talking about, all the policies, and putting it forward. And unlike Mark Carney's plan, well, far more reasonable deficits and a path. He doesn't promise to balance the budget, but it's moving towards that.
Okay. And one issue Poilievre mentions is one that a lot of Albertans find important, and that is provincial autonomy. So what's Poilievre promising there?
He's not going to infringe on provincial jurisdiction, which is, it's funny when you talk about national unity. One of the things that really irritates Alberta and really irritates Quebec is when the federal government decides we know better. Sure, you guys run healthcare. Sure, you guys run education, but we know better and we're going to run the system for you. That just really irritates those two provinces in particular. Other provinces are less annoyed by it, but Alberta and Quebec in particular, very annoyed by this. So he promises to respect provincial autonomy when it comes to resource development, when it comes to how healthcare and education and things like that are run. He promises to scrap things like the electricity tax, which has become an annoyance to several provinces. So, it's a very different way of looking at things than the Liberals.
Now, you mentioned Carney's platform there projecting much larger deficits, and the Conservative plan projects smaller deficits. So, but how do the two plans compare outside of that?
Well, so in the first year, Mark Carney's Liberal platform would project a deficit of about 62 billion. Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are predicting half of that. So one, they're going to spend less. Carney and the Liberals have projected far higher spending than the Conservatives. And they're also the Conservatives will try and find savings. Things like cutting the tens of billions of dollars that are spent by the federal government on consultants. Now, look, I spent decades living in Ottawa. Normally what happens in Ottawa is, going back to the Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien years, they cut the civil service. They said, okay, we need to balance the budget. We're going to cut the civil service. And so people were laid off. A lot of those people were brought back in as consultants because the government still needs people to run. What the Trudeau Liberals have done, and what the Carney Liberals propose to keep doing, is to increase. So they have increased the size of the civil service by 30 to 40%, but they've also more than doubled the cost of consultants. So, you're paying tens of thousands of more bureaucrats, but also paying billions of dollars more to consultants who tell the bureaucrats what to do. Well, why are you paying both?
And then we have the Liberals selling Mark Carney as this serious leader, an economist, but and he's calling for fiscal prudence. But doesn't this massive spending plan shoot a hole in that claim about Carney?
I couldn't believe when I was listening to Mark Carney's platform release over the weekend. I believe it was Saturday. He released his platform and he talked about how this was fiscal responsibility. This was prudence. And it's $130 billion in additional spending. So this is above and beyond. This is not, additional deficit. That's what it's going to be. Excuse me. The Trudeau spending plan was not curtailed, which you would have expected based on Mark Carney's rhetoric up until Saturday. Instead, he's going to add 130 billion. There's going to be 250 billion in deficit spending over the next bunch of years. It is unbelievable that this is the direction that they're going to go. And yet they call it prudent. They call it fiscally responsible. It is neither of those.
Now, speaking of Carney there, you have accused him of lying many times in this election campaign. And of course, that's a harsh accusation to make, but you just did it again over comments he made on Monday. So why are you saying Carney is lying?
So he was asked about why he's claiming that Pierre Poilievre is going to ban abortion in Canada.
Yeah.
And the reporter that asked the question pointed out that Poilievre has said, we're not going to do that. Oh, Carney said, well, it's not just an accusation, it's a fact. But it's not a fact. Poilievre stood on stage with him last week in Montreal at the leaders' debate and said he would not do that, that this has been Conservative Party policy for the last 20 plus years, that he wasn't going to do it. Why is he doing it? Because Poilievre says he will keep mass murderers in jail longer and he'll use the notwithstanding clause to do it. So from that, Carney takes that he will ban abortion and use the notwithstanding clause. What's fascinating about this is that Carney, who puts himself forward as a very serious Catholic, had just finished talking about Pope Francis, who had passed, and we just got the news on Monday morning. So Carney's talking about the moral clarity of Pope Francis, how he learned from this great spiritual and religious leader. He talked about how he cited Pope Francis's writings on the economy and capitalism, on the environment in his own writings. And then he turned around and lied about Pierre Poilievre and his policies. I'm sorry, there's an older teaching that says you shall not bear false witness. And that's what Mark Carney did. He was bearing false witness about Pierre Poilievre and his policies. Carney has lied. And look, I know that's a harsh term, but when you are outright lying, you're not trying to just spin something in your favor, that's lying. And he lied about having nothing to do with moving Brookfield's headquarters from Toronto to New York. He lied about when he claimed that he helped Paul Martin balance the budget, when the budget was balanced in 1998 and Carney didn't start working at the finance department until 2004. He lied when he said that, you remember that big signing ceremony where he signed the document and said, I've gotten rid of the carbon tax. The document that he signed in front of the cameras had no legal authority. It wasn't an order in council. It was make-believe. He said that he wouldn't talk to Donald Trump until Donald Trump showed Canada some respect. And we find out later that on his first day, he reached out to try and call Donald Trump, and Trump wouldn't return his call for 2 weeks. He said Thunderstruck by AC/DC was the song he warmed up to as a goalie when that song didn't come out until 1990, long after Mark Carney stopped playing hockey at high school or university level. Like, there's so many things that this guy lies about. He's casual with the truth, to put it bluntly.
You know, political parties often use fear to attract votes. And a very interesting post-media Leger poll was released showing that 6 in 10 Liberal voters said they were motivated primarily by, quote, a fear of what the future holds for Canada. On the other hand, 75% of Conservative voters said their motivation was, quote, primarily a hope for a better future in Canada to live, work, and raise a family. To talk about this and more is Brian Rushfeldt. He is the former president of Canada Family Action, where he spent many years lobbying members of parliament for common sense family values. Here is part of that interview with BCN's Paul Arthur.
You've basically got fear on the one side and hope on the other side. Just an interesting dynamic. Yeah.
Well, I think part of that would come down from the perspective of those two parties, and part of it from the perspective of what we've seen over the last 9 years of government is things falling apart and that probably provokes fear amongst the Liberals. On the other hand, I think the Conservatives have seen that, but they're also saying there's a better way. We can do better than that. We are a great nation. We can do better. So I can see why they have hope that, hey, we've got a future if we handle it right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, fear versus hope. I think a lot of the fear comes, of course, from the uncertainty with the, tariff threats and so forth. Uncertainty always tends to bring some anxiety and fear, right? So, maybe that settles out some. Who knows? Maybe things will switch a bit. I'm not sure, but yeah, I mean, we all need some hope here for sure, right? I mean, Canada needs that. We need to stop beating ourselves up. Say, we're as Canadians, we're just bad people. No, we're not. We're good people. We have a rich history, and we have a good future. So,
well, we've got a rich history and we've got a rich country. There's so many things about our country that make us a great country if we use it right.
Yeah, well, we have a huge natural resources sector, and that's, of course, one of the issues we need to talk about here, the carbon tax issue. We know that Carney, of course, cut back the consumer carbon tax that the Liberals themselves, mind you, championed for years. And he says he does plan to keep the industrial tax in place, though, saying, well, the heavy emitters are going to be doing the paying, all right, and you and I, the consumers, are going to be off the hook here. Well, another poll, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, it's another Leger poll, but showing 70%, wow, I thought, you got to be kidding, 70% of Canadians believe businesses pass on most or some of the cost of the industrial carbon tax to consumers, to us, but only 9% believe that businesses pay most of the cost, so 21% undecided. Now this could potentially, I guess it could potentially backfire on the Liberals?
I think it can. I think people will come to realize, and the simple example is if I'm running a business and the government taxes me an extra 10% for whatever purpose, as a business, I have to recoup that. So who am I going to recoup it from? I'm going to recoup it from you because the price is going to go up. It's simple economics, simple business practice. And I think Canadians are waking up to that slowly. But of course, the Liberal spin has been, oh, well, we'll just put it on those top level people and they will be the ones that pay. Not going to happen.
During elections, political parties and news organizations love to conduct and talk about polls. But do most Canadians understand what these snapshots of opinion mean, and can the numbers actually be trusted? Reg Manzer is one of the hosts of the Elevate podcast. He gave BCN's Jeanette Roche a breakdown of how polling is done and what the numbers actually mean. Here's part of that interview.
Well, it's hard because what you're doing is you're taking qualitative things, so feelings, ideas, intentions, and you're kind of turning them into numbers. So when that happens, that conversion, that's where the bias kind of creeps in. So the way you ask a question, who you're asking the question of, where, like how many people you're asking that question to, those can all kind of influence those numbers that are kind of seen as that source of truth. So there's a few ways you can kind of slip things in and maybe alter things, or honestly, in just by accident, make the wrong assumption.
And then there can also be like a margin of error, I would imagine, too, or in how something's worded could alter the effect, I would imagine.
Yeah, so that's more response bias. And I don't know if you saw it, but David Coletto, he's the head for Abacus Data. He actually kind of talked about that on a recent interview. He said, maybe we've had some response bias, which is, are we asking the right questions? Are we leading people to the answers that we think we're going to get? So that's kind of a way you can do that. With margin of error is a little bit different. So in kind of academic research, they use margin of error because you can ask a group of people. So if I walked up to you on the street and I said, hey, how do you feel about politics in Canada? Are you going to vote Liberal? Are you going to vote Conservative? There's a randomness to it because you're just picking people out of the crowd. With these polls, they put a margin of error on that, but it doesn't really mean a whole lot because they're really pulling from their group of candidates that they can ask. So people will sign up for online surveys or they'll sign up to be called. So there's not really a really good margin of error.
Turning our eyes over to provincial news, Alberta's Parks Minister traveled to the Middle East. The province says Todd Loewen visited Qatar this week as Alberta becomes the first North American member of the International Council of Game and Wildlife Conservation. The ratification puts Alberta among countries like Austria and Finland, which have been recognized for their commitment to responsible wildlife stewardship. And for the first time in 20 years, an Alberta premier went to South Korea, paying a visit to our sister province. Danielle Smith joined Governor Kim Jin-tae to celebrate 50 years of Alberta-Gangwon friendship by unveiling new signage at the Alberta Pavilion in Alpensia Resort. Smith says it's a sister province relationship that is focused mainly on education, culture, and sport. But it is now expanding into areas like health and life sciences, tech and innovation, and to also explore increased trade of sustainable energy like LNG. Smith says they toured the Navar Data Center where they discussed why Alberta is a top destination for data centers due to our cool climate, reliable energy, and skilled workforce. The last Alberta premier to visit was Ralph Klein in 2005. The province is reporting 29 new cases of measles in the province. The government says many of the new cases are in the southern and central parts of the province. AHS is reporting exposures in Calgary on April 11th at Crossiron Mills as well as IKEA. Exposures were also reported April 14th at both the Tabor and Coaldale Health Centers. There was another exposure at the Tabor Health Center on the 15th and in Lethbridge at the Diagnostic Imaging Department at the Chinook Regional Hospital on April the 16th. There have now been 118 measles cases reported in Alberta since early last month. Dr. Sunil Sukram has been temporarily appointed as Interim Chief Medical Officer of Health for Alberta as the province works to finalize the candidate who will take over the role permanently. In a statement, Alberta Health says Dr. Sukram has served Albertans through emergency medicine throughout his career, and they thank Dr. Mark Joffe for his service and dedication over the past 3 years. Up next, our federal election could be one of the most important ones in Canadian history. We hear from former Conservative Cabinet Minister and Canadian Alliance Party leader Stockwell Day, who gives us his thoughts.